President Muhammadu Buhari sends two key letters to the National Assembly, and federal lawmakers finally amend the Code of Conduct Bureau Act. I'm Lanre Lasese, and you're welcome to the Gavel. Now, it was expected. I'm speaking about President Buhari asking for Virement to fund the 2016 budget. It's been public news that with the crashing oil price and the activities of militants in the Niger Delta affecting oil production, the nation would be experiencing a budget deficit. Now, to fund the budget and channel funds to critical expenditure, President Buhari has written to the National Assembly requesting for Virement, which basically means shifting funds appropriated from one area to another area or to a different subhead. President Buhari is also asking the National Assembly for approval for external borrowing.
During the week, President Buhari sent two important letters to the National Assembly. In the first letter, President Buhari is requesting the Virement the funds appropriated for special intervention to be used to fund some recurrent and capital items. He is seeking a total of 180 billion naira to cover the shortfall in recurrent and capital expenditure. In the letter read on the floors of the Senate and the House of Representatives, President Buhari says the request is necessary because of the shortfall in provisions for personnel costs and inadequate provision for the amnesty program. President Buhari also stated that the Virement is needed to cover for the inadequacies in the NYSC budget, where an additional 8.5 billion naira is required to cover the backlog of 129,469 corps members who are currently due for call-up but would otherwise be left out till next year due to funding constraints.
Considering the fact that budgeted revenues are running behind targets largely due to the renewed violence in the Niger Delta, and there are no supplementary revenue sources, the most viable option for now is the Virement of appropriated funds from heads or sub-heads that may not be fully utilized before the end of this fiscal year. In the course of implementing the 2016 Appropriation Act, several MDAs have presented issues pertaining to salary shortfalls, the settlement of part of which has led to depletion of the Public Service Wage Adjustment, PSWA. Only 20 billion already fully released was provided in the 2016 budget for the Niger Delta Amnesty Program. Consequently, the allowances to ex-militants have only been paid up to May 2016. This is creating a lot of restiveness and compounding security challenges in the Niger Delta. Due to the devaluation of the Naira, the budgetary provisions for the foreign missions are no longer sufficient to cover all their costs. The provision for presidential initiatives for Northeast, 12 billion, has a balance of less than 1.5 billion, and there continues to be emerging challenges with internally displaced persons in the zone.
In the second letter written to the National Assembly, President Buhari is seeking the approval of the Parliament for an external borrowing of $29.9 billion to ensure the prompt implementation of projects. President Buhari says the projects, which needs funding, cuts across several sectors, namely agriculture, health, education, water supply, as well as employment generation and social safety net programs. The external borrowing is also to implement projects in the Northeast, such as polio eradication support and immunization projects.
Considering the huge infrastructure deficit currently being experienced in the country and the enormous financial resources required to fill the gap in the face of dwindling resources and the inability of our annual budgetary provisions to breach the infrastructure deficit, it has become necessary to resort to prudent external borrowing to bridge the financial gap, which will largely be applied to key infrastructure projects, namely power, railway, and roads projects, among others. The total cost of the projects and programs under the borrowing rolling plan is $29.960 billion US, made up of proposed projects and programs loan of $11.274 billion US, special national infrastructure project $10.686 billion US, Euro bonds of $0.5 billion and federal government budget support of $3.5 billion.
It was an interesting week in the National Assembly. The Senate got around to amending the Code of Conduct Bureau and Tribunal Act. This controversial amendment, like it's being called in several quarters, was done in the House of Representatives and sent to the Senate for concurrence. The Senate sent the amendments to its Committee on Ethics and Privileges to look at, and then it was presented on the floor of the Senate for lawmakers to vote on. The amendments to the Code of Conduct Bureau Act are making headlines across the country.
Thank you, Senator Nat'l.
It's the last day of legislative proceedings for the week, and federal lawmakers in the Senate are set for controversy as they amend the Code of Conduct Bureau and Tribunal Act. An early attempt by the Senate to amend the law was received with criticism by the public, as Senate President Bukola Saraki currently has a case before the tribunal. In the face of public disapproval, the Senate suspended work on the bill while amendment of the bill continued in the House of Representatives. The House of Representatives has concluded amending the bill, and these lawmakers are looking at the final amendment.
Original provision in the bill.
Federal lawmakers in both chambers made the following amendments to the Code of Conduct Bureau and Tribunal Act. Amendment to Section 18(1) and 2, transferring the President's regulatory power over the Bureau and Tribunal to the National Assembly. Amendment to Section 3 to make it compulsory for any case of breach or non-compliance to be brought to the notice of the person concerned to enable him make a written admission of such breach or non-compliance, and where such is done, there shall be no reference to the tribunal. Amendment to Section 24 to ensure that the chairman and other members of the tribunal shall be appointed by the President on the recommendation of the National Judicial Council, subject to the confirmation of the Senate.
Section 1(4) to reduce the tenure of the chairman and members from serving until they are 70 to a term of 5 years, subject to renewal for one further term only, making a total of 10 years in all. 3. Section 3D to make it compulsory for any case of breach or non-compliance to be brought to the notice of the person concerned to enable him make a written admission of such breach or non-compliance, and where such is done, there shall be no reference to the tribunal.
As recommended, that is to reduce from 50 to 30 to become part of the bill, say aye. Those against say nay. The nays have it, so it's gone back to 50.
However, the Senate rejected an amendment to Section 4(2) of the extant law, which had also sought to transfer the power of appointment and discipline of chairman and members of the Code of Conduct Bureau to the National Assembly.
The amendment to Clause 4(2), that is Clause 5, stand part of the bill, say aye. Those against say nay. The nays have it. By substituting the word
But midway into the concurrence process, some lawmakers expressed reservations about the process.
But I saw one important part which we've not really looked at properly, and I want the chairman to give us a reason why it should be so, and that is amendment of Section 4(2), that is 5. The principal act is hereby amended in Section 4(2) by substituting the word president with the words the National Assembly. I think an explanation should be given for the benefit of all Nigerians.
If a law is made for the Bureau and the people are constituted, the rules to govern their own action and discipline are only supplementary. How can National Assembly take responsibility for supplementary legislation on something which has already been delegated?
The amendment process, however, continued and was seen to a conclusion.
It's due a true reflection of what transpired Committee of the Whole. Thank you, Senior Leader.
Both chambers will now have to set up committees to harmonize the different aspects of the two versions passed by the House of Representatives and the Senate. The Senate President and a delegation of federal lawmakers in the Senate and House of Representatives took part in the just concluded 135th Inter-Parliamentary Union meeting in Geneva, Switzerland. The theme of the IPU Assembly meeting was human rights abuses as precursors of conflict, parliamentarians as early responders. Senate President Bukola Saraki at the Assembly meeting warned that it is high time national governments demonstrate courage in implementing laws against human rights abuses.
It's the 135th Assembly of the Interparliamentary Union in Geneva, Switzerland. Parliamentarians from different countries across the world are gathering to deliberate on issues affecting parliaments and people across the world. Nigeria's Senate President Bukola Saraki addresses the Assembly. He says Nigeria's parliament will continue to support the efforts of the world legislative body to check human rights abuses across the world. The Senate President also says the National Assembly of Nigeria will continue to be a people-centered institution where the interest and welfare of every Nigerian is paramount.
In Nigeria, our legislative agenda has emphasized human rights issues to do with peace and security, sexual harassment, workers' welfare, violence against women and children. We have passed in the past laws on Children's Rights Act, violence against persons prohibition, and only recently we passed the Discrimination Against Persons with Disabilities. The bill seeks to provide social protection to persons with disabilities and provide safeguards against any form of discrimination. The National Assembly of Nigeria has demonstrated a strong commitment to push the frontiers of progressive engagement and empowerment. We are working currently on the Bill to Act to incorporate and enforce certain provisions of the United Nations Convention on the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, the Protocol of African Charter on Women and People's Rights on the Rights of Women in Africa, and other matters connected therewith. This bill is at the second reading and hope to address equal access to education, strengthen the laws on violence against women, ending abduction of girls, gender mainstreaming, and female participation in governance. The National Assembly also is addressing the issue of sexual harassment, in particular those that become common in our tertiary institutions. It is our hope that also this will become law soon.
The Senate President also told the world body that the National Assembly is working to reposition Nigeria's economy to effectively meet the challenges of the 21st century on human development, economic and social rights. He says the IPU is right by linking the pervasive lack of respect for human dignity as a source of conflict worldwide, pointing out that democracy cannot flourish in the midst of human rights abuses and bad leadership.
We are repositioning the Nigerian economy to effectively meet the challenges of the 21st century by creating a business environment that not only creates more jobs, but create opportunities for all, youth, promote and sustain domestic entrepreneurs, and facilitate the economic inclusiveness and participation of all segments of society, so that the standard of living and socio-economic well-being of all Nigerians will be raised. This we are doing is by working closely with the private sector in addressing these bills. Dear colleagues, in conclusion, there are available laws addressing most of the human-related issues. The major problem I see are centered around non-implementation, poor oversight, and lack of enforcement of these laws when they are broken. We must be able to demonstrate courage. We must be able to make sacrifices. We must be able to be accountable and stand up for the people we represent. We must speak out loudly when our laws are not obeyed and work in synergy with other arms of government to ensure that human rights violation, whenever it occurs, is condemned and addressed. It is only when we're prepared to do this we have played our own role as parliamentarians in addressing human rights abuse.